Because what is your impossible? What is your proverbial Red Sea? Who do you hear behind you that's causing you fear? What are you hearing? Are you hearing that you won't be able to pay this month's rent? Are you hearing that you won't be able to cover your staff's paychecks because of a recession? What are you hearing? Are you hearing the nagging voice of your mom or your dad? What are you hearing? Are you hearing the voice of an ex-lover that said you weren't enough? What are you hearing? What is before you that looks impossible? And what is behind you that is speaking fear? The enemy is chasing after you and speaking fear over your life. And let me tell you something. If that's the case, be proud. Pick your head up. Because the enemy will always fight his hardest against you when you're on the verge of a breakthrough. The enemy will come at you when he knows you are right at the precipice of stepping into who your soul knows that you've been destined to be. He wants you to thwart that plan. He wants you to walk away. He doesn't want you to step into the Red Sea and see God move. No. Now, here's the truth. Pharaoh isn't chasing you. His chariots aren't chasing you. But maybe shame is. Pharaoh isn't chasing you. But maybe the nagging voice of failure is. Pharaoh isn't chasing you. But maybe debt collectors are. When we read this, I want us to hear the voice of God say, but you gotta go. We can't stay here, we gotta go. After 400 years of oppressive slavery under the hand of Pharaoh and the Egyptian army, the children of Israel are at the edge of freedom. Hundreds of years, I need us to understand just the significance of this. This generation would have never known freedom. They were born into slavery. Their parents were born into slavery. Their parents were born into slavery. Their parents were born into slavery, and quite possibly, their parents were born into slavery. All they've known is being a slave. This concept of freedom feels so foreign to them. And maybe that's the way that you feel today. No, you don't understand. This is what my family has gone through. Cycles of poverty, generational cycles of lying, generational cycles of shame or sex addiction, generational cycles of anger, generational cycles. I'm here to tell you that we are free because of what Christ did on Calvary. That the Egyptians you see today, you won't see tomorrow. Whatever cycles that have been keeping you enslaved, your family's enslaved. Do you know by the saving grace and the bloodshed on Calvary, you can overcome? Now, God has seen the misery of his people. He's heard their cry, and he said, I'm going to send you a rescuer. And I'm going to move through Moses, a man named Moses, and you will find freedom. So when we started this sermon, reading Psalm 106, this psalm is a reflection of a revelation that they encountered because God showed up for them. This psalm was written years after they were in freedom, but it was to remember what God did for them against the Egyptians. You don't have to turn there, but we read it already. But it said, when our ancestors were in Egypt, they gave no thought to your miracles. They did not remember your kindness. They rebelled by the Red Sea. Now, I've read this story so many times. I've heard it in Sunday school. I'm very familiar with this. But I never would have said that the children of Israel rebelled. They were fearful, but is that rebellion? This is the reason why. And watching the movie that you probably can't see, it's available on Max, whatever. If you want to see Exodus, God and Kings, you can. But the reason why it was just so vivid for me is that you could actually see the Nile turn to blood. You could see animals die. You could see frogs in the palace. You could see pestilence and locusts. You could see the firstborn child lose their life. The children of Israel saw all of this. They saw themselves walking out with plunder and booty from the 400 years that they worked and did not receive payment. They saw all of this. At the moment of conflict, they said, where's God? Don't we do the same? God has been so faithful to us. In the moment that there's trial, trauma, and tribulation, we're like, where is God? I'm going to go back to that chick who kept me warm at night. I'm going to go back to that chocolate cake that soothed my issues. I'm going to go back to what I downloaded so I could satiate a need. I don't need that. We are the children of Israel. They're on the edge of their breakthrough, and they had to make a split decision, a split C decision. Today, you will have to make a decision. Choose this day who you serve. For me and my house, the Father's house, for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Here's one thing that you hear me say, though. I don't fault the Israelites. I really don't. I get it, because I've been there. And if you're honest, you've probably been there as well. There's something in front of you that feels absolutely impossible. And there's something behind you that is absolutely terrifying. So the question that we ask is, did God really say that? Can I trust him? Is he really calling me out? We have to trust God to move instead of staying here and continuing a pattern of fear. For us to go to where God's calling us to, for us to have new perspectives, for us to go to the places that God is calling us to, we got to go higher. We got to go, Raquel. We got to go. So when the darkness of Bulgaria is behind me and a Don Mafia is in front of me, I'm screaming, we got to go. They were terrified. They were terrified. But in order for them to step into new horizons, they had to put one foot in front of the other and step forward. Look at Exodus 14:10. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. I love that. They knew what to do. They were frightened, and they called out to the Lord. But why did they cry out to the Lord? It's because of what the Egyptians represented. The Egyptians represented power, and the Egyptians represented their past. What is behind you that brings fear? What is behind you that terrorizes you? Think about this. This is for generations. The only thing they have known is slavery. They see the sea in front of them, and they see slavery behind them. In the movie Exodus, there's this scene with Christian Bale and an Israelite, and it's this scene that we're about to read right now, and I'm going to color it for some context because I just love the truth of the Word of God. On your road to freedom, there will be dissenters. Look at verse 11. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die?" Where did their faith go? Just before they were walking out with plunder and booty, and they got recompense, and they saw God move, and they were protected, and all of a sudden, boom, in a blink of an eye. What have you done by bringing us out of Egypt? Did we not say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? Side note, what happens when people get afraid? They make up trash. Because if you look at the narrative in Exodus, not one person was like, I want to stay here a slave. No one. And now there's dissenters. Now there's people that are like, we said we didn't want to leave. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. They had never been free. They're living in frightened. In human trafficking, there's something called Stockholm Syndrome. It's basically the devil you know is better than the devil that you don't. So survivors of human trafficking who are rescued out will go back to their traffickers. And we do the same thing. We go back to the things that were our coping mechanism. We end up back in their bed, or we end up back in the boardroom that we said we were not going to go back to because we need the authority, we need the power, we need the influence. We go back and compromise who God has called us to be and the new places that God is inviting us to step into. So we leave. We leave and we quit. And I get it because there's so many of us, especially when we start the new year, where we're like, new year, new me. And then the last 2 weeks, you're like, same me, new year. This is pathetic. I'm still the same weight, still drive the clunker, still in this apartment, still single, still married. I mean, fill in the blank, you get to pick. Whatever your same is. But God is going to get the glory, but you have to walk through. Let me say it this way. God is going to get you to, but you have to walk through. God's going to take us to the promised land, but you have to be willing to put one foot in front of the other. This scene is so real in the movie. And after the dissenter is like, did you bring us here to die? Now, this line isn't in the Bible, but I love this line that Moses says to this person. You don't have to come, but if you stay here, you will die. And I feel like I had a Moses moment where I'm looking out into your faces and I'm telling you, I'm not going to tell you you're going to die. What I will say is if you stay here and if you do not change, nothing in your life will change and you will be a slave yet again. If you don't move forward, you're still going to be here in 10 years wondering why your life is the same. So the beat in your chest and the frustration that you feel isn't Pharaoh chasing you. It's the voice of God saying, I have so much more for you. You cannot be using the same excuses that you've used for 10 years. You have to go on. You have to move forward. You can navigate with fear, but put one foot in front of the other. There's always that voice that will say, yes, but in Egypt we had leeks and onions, but you were slaves. Don't go back. Don't go back.